Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
I'm a single mother of my 8-year-old boy Mark. When this happened, he was 5 and I was 27. I have my own house that was passed down to me from my grandparents. It's in the quiet side of town with a lot of older people, and I still live here with Mark today. It was Christmas time, and I was out with Mark shopping. I was doing my Christmas shopping for my family. Mark and I went to the mall, including a few clothing stores and a hardware store where I bought a gift for my dad. After all the shopping was done, I took Mark to McDonald's to get him some burgers and ice cream. Afterwards, we left the mall through the south exit, and here we bumped into a mall Santa standing outside. He waved at us and said the usual Santa stuff. He then knelt down to get to Mark's level and asked him what he wanted for Christmas. Mark led my hand closer to the Santa, and I allowed it because he seemed like a normal, nice mall Santa. Mark said he wanted a Nintendo Switch, which ironically was what I was planning on buying him for Christmas. The Santa laughed and said, "If you're good, maybe you'll get it," while looking up at me and winking. I smiled, and then he stood up and started complimenting me, saying to Mark, "Your mother's a looker, Mark, you know that?" And Mark laughed, even though he didn't know what that meant. I still smiled. Then we had a couple minutes worth of seemingly friendly adult conversation about the holiday mayhem and such. The guy said he worked for the mall. I regrettably mentioned the stress of being a single mom during Christmas is unfathomable, and then I made a joke about needing Santa's help. Then the Santa made what I thought was an innocent joke, saying, "Mark, have you ever heard the song, 'I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus'?" And Mark shook his head yes. Then he leaned in towards me with his cheek, implying he wanted me to kiss his cheek. I was going to give him an innocent little peck on the fake beard, but as I leaned in, he turned his head and tried doing that old trick where he kisses you on the lips instead. I moved my face away in time. The way he did it was so creepy and aggressive too. He looked at me and started doing the Santa kind of laugh, but there was nothing jolly about it. I said, "Come on, Mark," and we started walking away. He yelled "Merry Christmas," and that was the last thing I heard him say. As we drove away past the back exit of the mall, I noticed he wasn't there in front of the entrance anymore. I wish I took that into consideration as to what may have happened next. We got home, and after bringing everything inside, I locked the door, and Mark and I started to watch a Christmas movie. Our wholesome time together was then interrupted. My doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was late for any kind of door-to-door people. I told Mark to keep watching as I went to go answer the door. I said, "Who is it?" through the door, and a man's voice on the other side said, "It's Santa." My heart dropped. I said, "If you're the mall Santa, please go away or I'm calling the cops." He replied, "You dropped something out of your bag, miss. I'm just looking to return it." I replied, "What did I drop?" He replied, "I don't know, miss. I'm not looking to be nosy, but if you open the door, I can hand it to you." I repeated myself that I wanted him to leave now. I then decided to call the mall management office of the mall to report this, but the man on the phone said they don't officially hire any mall Santas at this mall, and that whoever's dressing as Santa is doing it on their own accord. With that bit of information, I felt incredibly unsafe. I went back to be with Mark, but my mind was elsewhere now. I felt this sickly, worried feeling in my gut. I made an excuse to get up again after a few minutes. I went to the kitchen out of earshot of the TV. I raised the blinds to the kitchen window. I couldn't see anything out there, being that the kitchen light was on and it was pitch black outside. But I heard a man yelling, "Ho, ho, ho." He was probably out there watching me at that very moment, looking out the window. I had no choice but to call the police and report that I was followed by a man dressed as Santa. I told Mark to keep watching the movie, and I spoke to the police outside. They took a report and were on their way. The police having come made me feel just a little better. A few nights later, though, my doorbell rang again, around the same time, if not a little later. Mark was already asleep tonight. I was in the living room watching a show. I turned off the TV and went upstairs to my room, which is connected to Mark's room. The doorbell didn't ring again, but I never went back downstairs that night. It wasn't until the next day when I was leaving the house that I found the note taped to my front door. It was typed out and printed. This is a picture of the note, and it said, "I'll just be blunt. I'm sure you can guess who this is. I didn't mean to scare you the other night. I just had a long shift, and when a pretty lady talks to you after pretending to be Santa for 6 hours, hormones kind of go crazy. You and your son are the cutest things ever, and I'd love to one day be a part of your family. You can't pretend you didn't feel the connection when we spoke the other night. I already know where you live, now I just need your number. Feel free to shoot me a text whenever, and maybe we can plan something one day." Sorry, I know this may seem creepy or a bit much, but I'm the kind of guy where if I see something I like, I go after it. Anyway, happy holidays if we don't speak soon. Here's my number. Best, Ted. I wanted to crumple this up, but I took a picture of it, called the police again, and gave this to them. Since it had his number on it, the police could work with that. They said I'd be hearing from someone when action was taken, and that following Monday, I got a call from, I assume, a detective telling me that the man would not be contacting me anymore, and if he did, to let him know. I never heard from that creep again. I assume the police threatened to arrest him if there was any further contact. This happened on Christmas Eve back in '97 when I was 7 years old. Since we're Jewish, we don't celebrate Christmas, so Christmas Eve was just like any other night for us. Our dad is a doctor, and since he's Jewish, he always works on call at the hospital during the Christmas holidays, so he wasn't home tonight. That just left my little sister and I by ourselves for the evening while our dad worked. Technically, our mom was home, but to be blunt, she was an alcoholic. Back then, being a 7-year-old, I had no idea what alcoholism was. All I knew was that my mom was always passed out once it got dark and near impossible to wake up. Sorry if it sounds harsh or TMI, but it's relevant to my story. My sister and I were downstairs watching TV when we heard a knock at the door. Being the oldest, I went to see who it was. Our door had glass panes built into it, which made it easy to see who was on the other side. There was a man standing outside in a Santa suit holding a bag, and when he saw me, he smiled and waved at me to come to the door. I went near the door but did not open it, and I thought it was odd that someone dressed like Santa would come to our house out of anyone's house in the neighborhood. He said, "Hey kid, it's me Santa. Let me in, I'll give you your presents." I remember point blank telling him that Santa isn't real, and that if he was, he doesn't give Jews presents anyway. That's when he said, "Of course I'm real. In the past, I only used to visit Christian homes, but lately, I felt bad that Jewish kids never get any presents. So this year, I changed the rules so that you can get presents too." But I didn't buy it, and instead, I remember getting mad at him, arguing that Jews get presents. We just get them during Hanukkah and not on Christmas. The smile fell from his face, and all his jolly charm disappeared as he began demanding I open the door. I told my sister to dial 911, and the guy seemed to run away. We did call the cops. However, unfortunately, the operator didn't understand what we were saying. Looking back, I think she may have thought we were just little kids excited that Santa Claus was coming to our house. Regardless, she didn't take us seriously, and instead just told us that this number was to be used for emergencies only before disconnecting the call. My sister and I now got really scared because we didn't know who else to call. Since we were only 4 and 7, the only numbers we knew how to dial were our home number and 911. And since this is the 90s, my dad didn't have a cell phone yet, and I had no idea what the hospital number was to reach him there. And with our mom impossible for us to wake up, we were essentially on our own. We hoped the man wouldn't come back, but a few minutes later, he was knocking on the door again. He said he knew the cops weren't coming and to go ahead and let him in or we'd be in big trouble. My sister started crying and ran upstairs trying to wake my mom. Not knowing what else to do, I did the one thing that made sense to my 7-year-old brain. I grabbed a bunch of candles we keep for our menorah and lit them all, then ran below where the smoke detector was. I blew out all the candles quickly before tossing them all up to the smoke detector. Thankfully, they gave off enough smoke to set off the smoke alarm. As an adult, I realized how stupid this was, and fortunately, I did not accidentally set the house on fire. But at that time, all I knew was that the smoke alarm would instantly call 911 for me and send help to our home. There was a fire department not even 2 minutes from our house, so they got here pretty fast. My sister came downstairs, scared of the fire alarm, but I told her there was no fire and to not go outside, but instead wait inside with me. To my amazement, the guy still did not leave. Instead, the bastard ran to the firefighters, presumably telling them that he was glad they showed up. I remember that he claimed he was my dad, and that he dressed up like Santa Claus for Christmas Eve to surprise us. He explained that his suit didn't have any pockets to hold his keys, and that with the door locked, he couldn't get the door open to save us from the fire, so he begged the firefighters to break down the door, and surprisingly, the firefighters seemed to believe him. They were actually getting ready to break down the door and told us to stand back, but we started crying, shouting at them that he's not our dad, that our dad is working at the hospital and that we have no idea who this guy was, and that we don't even celebrate Christmas. The firefighter who was about to break down the door thankfully stopped and listened to us. He asked, "You don't celebrate Christmas?" I told him no because we're Jewish, and showed him my kippah on my head as well as our menorah. I then broke down crying, explaining how I set off the smoke alarm to try and get help because the police wouldn't believe us, and to please not let the guy in. The firefighter thankfully believed me, and then asked the guy why Santa would show up to a Jewish home. I don't remember exactly what the guy said, but the firefighters clearly didn't believe him. Two of them wrestled the guy to the ground while the other called the police to come by. They also asked what hospital my dad worked at so they could let him know what was going on. The police arrived and arrested the guy, while another officer stayed with us until my dad came home and explained the situation to him. My dad was furious with our mom for being wasted and essentially sleeping through the whole thing, but mostly he was grateful that we were okay. As far as Christmases go, I was glad to have our usual boring and quiet Christmas the following year. To this day, I think being Jewish saved my sister and I's lives, because had we opened that door to let Santa in, there's a good chance that would have been our final Christmas.
There's one thing even more terrifying than these clips, and that's what your life would be like without watching more of our videos.